Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive! This week, I continue my series on the Pantheons of Scion 2nd edition core books, specifically focusing on the hero book, with the Deva of South Asia. Now, the Deva are kind of in a interesting position. They are quite possibly the longest and oldest continually worshipped real-life pantheon, both in the real world and in the game setting. This, in the setting, gives them a sort of prestige, because they have the oldest, the most Scions who rose to divinity, some extremely powerful relics and birthrights. And from the real world perspective, for the research part, you're dealing with a set of stories that have evolved and changed and, well, frankly, can be a convoluted mess at times, because they are contradictory and always changing for a long time. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about the Deva. The Deva are a complex pantheon. Unlike many of the others where you have a strict-ish hierarchy of where they're from and the stories of how they were created, etc., you run into conflicts in the Deva's stories. In some cases, Durga is the embodiment, has always been there. Has always been the font of the Shakti, the feminine energy for the pantheon. But at the same time, one story I had heard was that the Deva, all the male gods of the pantheon, were fighting some great Asura, and they couldn't beat it. They turned to Brahman for assistance, and he said, "Give this portion of your energy." And this portion of their energy was the Shakti. And so that Durga is the Shakti of every god in the pantheon. And she bears all of their weapons, whether it be the trident, the chakram, the mace, the bow, all of the weapons of the entire Deva pantheon. Okay? There are some versions that say that Durga is a separate deity from Parvati, Lakshmi, and Sarasvati. And there are some that say that they are aspects of her. When you really get into it, the Deva are a complicated mix. You can't pinpoint exactly which of the various tales is the objective truth. But that's okay, because there's this veil of illusion that keeps us from knowing the truth anyway. It's a core philosophy of the Hinduisms, whether you're talking Shaktiism, Vaishnavism, Shaivism, or any other subsect of the Hinduisms. The concept that we have this veil keeping us from seeing clearly what our dharma is, what we should be doing, keeping us trapped in the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. But that's probably for another discussion or another channel, not this one, because I'm not really wanting to get into the deep philosophical aspects. Now, of course, as I mentioned, you are still dealing with a active religion. A set of religions, really, that has not stopped being worshipped for a very, very long time. The roots can be drawn all the way back to the Indus Valley civilization. And, when you get into the modern day, every region has its own distinct practices, so that you can actually say that, the Hinduism in Rajputana is different from the Hinduism in Maharashtra. And there's commonalities, and they can relate to each other, but there's differences in practices, in symbology, and and when you start getting away from India, you start getting into more varied and divergent Hinduisms. The Hinduism you see in Thailand, and the Hinduism you see in Indonesia, though a minority, is very, very different from what you would see in the main portion of India itself. And this is something you really have to understand. Every time someone runs this, any time you're running the Deva, you're going to have your work cut out for you in research. Now, with regards to the game aspects, first off, the virtues of the Devas are conscience and duty. These are, of course, the opposing sides to each other. And one of the best story examples is the Bhagavad Gita, where Prince Arjuna was looking at the vast army of his enemies arrayed before him, an army that included some of his friends and family, and his charioteer Krishna had to explain to him how his duty applied. That as a king, as a warrior, he has the duty to defeat his enemies. Even though he, as a person, wants to find a peaceful resolution, wants to not kill his friends, his family, his cousins. And this is the core virtue conflict. And remember, in Scion, you're kind of drifting back and forth on the virtue scale between one end and the other. It doesn't really have a lot of mechanical sway per se, but it is kind of an important thing. And it kind of tells where your character stands ethically, spiritually. Now, the other pantheons. Alright, so the Yazada aren't going to be covered in this series. They are the Persian deities. And they are the oldest rivalry that the Deva have. In fact, the Deva kind of tend to say that the Yazada are just trumped up titans. And, oh yeah, they kind of look askance at the Aesir as well, since the Aesir have at least one giant among their numbers. For other pantheons, like the Teotl and the Theoi, the Aztec and the Greek, they kind of have their own relationships with them. The Deva get along very well with the Teotl, because the Teotl are as much about let's slaughter all titans as the Deva are. The Theoi kind of have some issues. Some issues from the past. You know how certain groups kind of conquered areas that were heavily Greek-oriented. But the Orisha and the Loa are of course not covered in this because they're not in Hero, but they're kind of a sub-pantheon off of the Orisha. The Orisha are the sub-Saharan Africa pantheon, for lack of a better term. It's kind of a bit of an overgeneralization, maybe. We'll get to them later. But they like to oppose the Deva, though they're always polite about it. And they kind of point to the Deva-Yazada feud as a warning sign for how just pointing at someone and going, "You're a Titan," can be dangerous. And more of a way to slur your enemies than to actually oppose them. Of course, the Deva get along really well with the Kami of Japan and the Shen of China and East Asia. Well, I mean, considering Yamaraja actually runs hell for all three religions, for all three pantheons. And, well, there's a lot of similarities between some of their deities. Like the Japanese goddess of the dawn has a lot of similarities to the Hindu goddess of the dawn. In fact, you might kind of, well, if you wanted to use the Hindu goddess Ushas, you might actually use the Kami, that is the Kami of the dawn, Ama no Uzumi, to be the stand-in. And the biggest thing that the Deva have is that they are an old pantheon. They have a lot of prestige from their age and power and their many, many sacred sites. this also kind of means that they're a big target. Well, let's just say that when Titans go a-hunting, they don't see any problems going for Deva first. Just because, well, the Deva are a big target. And they might not even really notice some losses. And of course, the Deva's response to this is, come on, we can take it. And yeah, guess what? Your characters as Scions of this Pantheon? Guess who's probably gonna get targeted first? Nothing personal. Just, you've got a bullseye on your back, and your front, and your head, and your arms. But that is the overview of the Deva in Scion 2nd Edition. Next week, I will be talking about the Kami. So until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.